This is Brother Peter with tidbits from the Word. So proud to be with you today. We're going to do a little preclude look at the book of Joshua. Joshua was a man that Jesus himself came from heaven to speak to. One of the things in the Bible is that Jesus came to the earth 2 or 3 times before he came as a baby in the manger, and made claim and conquest to some people for different reasons. And so we see one of those here with Joshua. But right now, that's not what we're going to talk about. What we're going to talk about right now is introducing the beginning of the conquest of Joshua to carry the Israelite children over in to the promised land. And we're going to look at the 3 most important individual stages of people that were in the book of Joshua. Of course, it started out with Joshua. He was the head guy. And then we had Caleb. Remember, Joshua and Caleb were the 2 guys that went into the promised land, came back with good report. And then we had the lady Rahab. And Rahab, of course, was the lady that had a house on the wall of Jericho, and it was said that she was the king's harlot. Well, we'll see that, whether that's so or not. It is in a sense, and it isn't in a sense. The book describes the invasion and the conquest and the settlement of Palestine by the nation of Israel. Now, Palestine was going to be their land. By the way, it is still their land today. All of it. Wherever somebody is on the land that God gave to the Israelite children, any area that somebody is on, they're on the Israelites' land. They're on the children of God's land. The book of Joshua is a counterpart of Exodus. It records how God had led out of the land, out of bondage, while Joshua tells us how he led his people into the land of blessing. Now, Exodus tells us how they were gone out, and Joshua tells us how they're coming in. And Moses summarizes both books in Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy 6 and 23. And he brought us out from there. That's in Exodus. He brought us out from there. And let's see, where are we? He brought us out from there that he might bring us in to give us the land which he swore to give our fathers. And by the way, this is the exact same picture of myself, Brother Peter. I was an alcoholic, living totally in sin, cursing God daily, aggravating everybody, being a drunk, doing everything I was not supposed to do. God took me out of that and is still bringing me in to the new life. I'm in the new life, and he's bringing me in how to way to live the new life, which is so important, to live the new life. Now we come to Joshua, who's been called the Ephesians of the Old Testament. You remember the book of Ephesians in the New Testament, how they did and what they did? Well, this is a likeness of that. If you wanted to take books in the Bible, and you can do this, and overlay one book over another and say these books are compatible. They are the same type of thing. And so here we are. Joshua takes them across the Jordan River and the Red Sea. Wait a minute, Exodus brought them across the Red Sea, and Joshua's going to take them across the Jordan River and bring the people into Canaan. God performs whatever is necessary to assure both the exit and the entrance of his people. The necessary thing he did to bring them out was open the Red Sea. the necessary thing he does to bring them in is to open the Jordan River. And they walk across the Jordan River on dry ground. By the way, one of the first things back in 1972 when I got saved, this was one of the first things I studied. And I saw the picture of God holding his hand up. And that water on that river, I calculated it. And later on found out that it is the truth. That the river stood out. It stopped and stood up. It kept running. But as it was running, it was standing up. Stood up some 26 miles high. You say, well, Peter, you're some kind of nut. Search it out for yourself. And see if God's not powerful enough. He made the river to make it stand up 26 miles. No wonder the people fainted within their hearts when they knew the children of Israel were coming across. Some 2 million people coming across. The people fainted within the heart. They locked their cities up. They locked the doors. They were scared to death. They were shaking in their boots. And Joshua came across. All right. Now, the seventh thing we see on this stage of this play acting out before us, because we're looking back at it, and we can see as it was acting out. We saw how it acted out. And we see the salvation of this harlot Rahab from Jericho. And we see the condemnation of the Hebrews from the tribe of Judah. Now, Achan was the guy that got everybody in trouble. Achan was the guy that saw something that he wanted. He took it. Bar of gold, drop of silver, a piece of clothing. Buried it under his tent. Being smart, buried the gold deep, the silver, and then a little dirt in the silver, then a little dirt in the clothing, then a little dirt. Thinking if he got caught, he could take one piece out maybe. But that wasn't the case. The case was God was looking at everything. He was looking at the beginning to the end, all Achan did. He was looking at what Achan did in his heart, not just with the things that he had desired to have, the things of the world, and was willing to steal for it, and caused a great problem there, and for them for a period of time. Many people died. We view a prince from glory and some beggars from Gideon. And remember how they dressed up and like they had been on the road for years, and they came and they mingled with the people. They said, if we don't do something to stay out of their way, they're going to kill us. So they dressed up in rags and everything, and they came over and said, help us out, give us something to eat, we're starving to death, and all this and that. Come to find out, they weren't. They were imposters. Joshua records twin miracles of the falling walls and the standing sun. You remember Joshua said, and had the sun stand still or go back 10 degrees. Joshua had the sun stand still. That was one of the miracles. The other miracle was they marched around the walls 7 times. And on the 7th time, they gave the big shout. The walls fell down. The walls didn't fall down because of the noise of the shout. The walls fell down because of the obedience of the people doing what they were supposed to do. By the way, isn't it amazing that God put the priest out in front of the warriors? If anybody was in harm's way, it was the priest. They had to be out so many feet in front of everybody. And they're marching, and they've got their horns and their trumpets. But they're marching. But for the first 6 days, they marched silent. And they marched 1 time around the walls. On the next day, they marched 7 times around the walls. Can you imagine that from end to end, right in front of the priest, of course, was probably the back side of the group, because the walls were not that big, and there were so many of them. Can you imagine the tromping sound and the tromping and all day long of them going around 1 time, of them going around a time, and then 7 times? Wow. Can you imagine the fright in the hearts of these people? By the way, the seventh day of this conquest, do you not think that the people were probably getting very antsy and everything? They've been 7 days. No food coming in the gate. No nothing coming in the gate. They were a walled city. They relied on things from the outside to come in on a constant basis. Everything was cut off. All the people that did bring stuff in couldn't come, and everything was cut off in the city for that period of time. Now, we see another stage set up, and on this stage, the conquest of the land, Israel, its claims and its possessions. Now, God had promised this land to these people. Do you remember Abraham stood on the mountain and he looked far off down through the valleys, 125 miles, I understand, down through the Rift Valley, 125 miles straight down. You can see everything, and about 30-40 miles wide. You can see everything. God said, this is your land. I'm giving this to you. This is going to be the land of milk and honey. It's going to be your land, and you can have it. And so they made preparation to take it. And God speaks to Joshua, and this is what he said. You are going to be the leader of Israel. You're going to cross the Jordan into Palestine. He was to be strong and courageous. He was to observe and meditate upon the law of God while he was doing this act. And he could then be absolutely confident that the Lord thy God is with thee. Now Joshua speaks to Israel, and he says, prepare your victuals, for within 3 days ye shall pass over the Jordan. He said, prepare everything. Prepare everything you got, your clothes, all the stuff you got. Prepare whatever's going to happen is going to happen in 3 days, and we're going to go off. And when we do, we're going to cross over the Jordan. Now, he was absolutely confident that what God said, God would perform. Here's a man that was confident that what God said he would perform. Now, and then 2 men are sent in to spy out Jericho. The king of Jericho learns of their mission and sends out a search party to find them. Now these 3 spies, there were 3 spies, and they're hidden by, the Bible doesn't exactly say that this lady was newly converted, but she was converted. My summation, and I have not studied this to the nth degree, and I need to do that, about Miss Rahab. Do you know that she was more than likely not a harlot of consent, but a Jewish girl that was stolen back in one of the wars? She was stolen from there as a young little girl, just like Daniel was, just like Nehemiah was. And here the king had put her up, and when she became of age, he made her his harlot. Not a willing harlot, but a harlot by force. A harlot that had to do what the king said, no choice. But her heart was still for God. She was perhaps taught when she was young about God and the commandments and about the things. And yet she was physically brought to a place to where she had no choice but to follow the course of the day. So Rahab had not only heard the mighty power of God, chapter 2, verse 9 through 11, but actively came to trust him. Also, she must have possessed some kind of testimony, for it was to her house the spies first went. And I do believe that she had a spiritual, soulish testimony, and God used her as a pinpoint, and perhaps God had her there years ahead of time already, because God knows the end from the beginning. She was in the annals of God, in the plans of God, and here she was. And she had had a testimony. For her house the spies first went. And later the king of Jericho, he guesses. He guesses this. Now this king, having this young lady as his harlot, I'm supposing, picked up on the fact that she was not just an everyday average harlot. She was willing to do as the king asked her, to be obedient to her God. She was willing to sacrifice her body to the king, to be willing in the soul and the spirit to be obedient to her God, so that God could use her later on. If you please, just as Paul was hanging in the prison suffering that persecution, this lady was suffering the persecution of the king, that God may use her at a later date. Wow. They might be hiding there also. Well, this converted harlot mentioned 3 times in the New Testament she's mentioned. 3 times she's mentioned in the New Testament. In Matthew 1 and 5, Hebrews 11:31, and in James 2:25. She later married a Hebrew man named Salmon, who may have been one of the spies. At any rate, this former, I don't like they use this word in this particular narration, but they use this word, a former pagan. I actually personally do not believe that to be correct. I believe she was a former God-loving person who was carried into a pagan situation and never, but never, forgot her God, who God was. And I don't know if pros and cons of that, who would get in that and really study it and prove it any other way. I have not been able to find anything to prove what I'm saying opposite, and neither have these people been able to prove what they're saying opposite. So she also became the great-great-grandmother of King David. This is one of the most beautiful illustrations of grace of God in the Bible. Let me tell you something. She would not have been where she was if God had not put her there. She was going to be the great-great-grandmother of David. She was in the lineage of David, who's in the lineage of Christ. She, therefore, was not there by chance. She was there by an act of God. She was in the annals of God, written down before time was time. God knew the story from the end to the beginning. This was not a happenstance situation, this lady being where she was. I don't even like attributing the word harlot to her, because I really believe she physically was forced to be used by a king, and her heart, her mind, her body, her soul, her spirit, and all the rest of her were not what you would say a given harlot by Satan, but a person laying down their life for God, God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Ghost. Okay, this beautiful illustration of grace. The passage in chapter 3 and 13. The priest would lead the way to the Jordan River, carrying the ark of God. And again, I will say, I said a few minutes ago, it's always astounded me that the priest had to walk way out in front of everybody, and they were in harm's way. If some marauders were to come after them, who's going to get it first? The priests are. So they have to totally depend on the God of heaven to keep them from that happening to them. And so we see that. And then the congregation was to follow them a half a mile behind. So they're a whole half a mile ahead. They're a whole half a mile ahead of the people. That's a lot of footage. 5,280 feet in a mile. So that means that they're 2,240 feet in front of the people. You can't throw a stone that far. You hardly can shoot an arrow that far. So protection-wise, they had to 100% call on God for their protection. I'm suspecting some of those priests were shaking in their boots, saying, man, and by the way, we're heading for the Jordan River, and we got to put our feet in first. Oh, man. God required them to use their the power that he gave them. When the priests put their feet in the Jordan River, immediately it stopped flowing, allowing Israel to cross on dry land. Can you imagine that? They had to walk into it while it was still water in it. And once they just kept marching. In Portland, Maine, where I was born, there was a group of soldiers, and they were marching down, I forget the street now, in Portland, and it went down on the main dock, called the main dock in Portland. And they're marching on the dock. They march down and they march on the dock. Somehow, the head guy that's leading the thing didn't give a command to halt. And those guys marched off the end of the dock. They just kept marching. And several of them went off the end of the dock before the guy realized what's happening and commanded, halt. But they just marched right off, no questions asked. And this is a kind of a picture here of no questions asked. They marched right in. They just marched right in there and kept getting it. And let's see, after they got across, they were ordered by God to construct a pile of 12 stones each. One pyramid was to be placed in the middle of the river, and the other on the west side of the Jordan. So they built 2 pyramids of stones that God had them put for memorial, so that the children of Israel that came afterwards could see the memorial of where God had opened the river for them and made it. One on the west bank, and the future generations could see the faithfulness of the rolling back of the Jordan. They could see the faithfulness of their forefathers and the purification of the people. Upon reaching the western side of Palestine, God ordered the males of Israel to be circumcised. This was done, and the name of the place was called Gilgal, which means to roll away. Wow. Can you imagine 1,000,000 men and boys or more being circumcised all at one time? They are in a place of vulnerability. When a grown man gets circumcised, he is in the place of vulnerability. He can't do anything for days. He is completely beside himself for days. He has no ability to work, to walk, no desire to eat, no desire to do anything. He is incapacitated for a period of time. So here is a whole group of people totally incapacitated. If anybody was going to be able to fight in that, would have been the women and the children that were under 8. If they were 8 or over, they got circumcised. Wow, what a picture. Man, whew. This is a purification they're in a new land now, and they got purified to be in that new land. And then they had to come up the Passover. And the children of Israel encamped in Gilgal and kept the Passover on the 14th day of the month at even in the plains of Jericho. Now they're in the land of Jericho. They're in the plains of Jericho. I'm sure that other than at the city that they were besieging, there were many marauders out there in Jericho. Many other tribes, many other people that would have came against the children of Israel had they dared to. I'm believing the standing up of the Jordan, the stopping of the water, and the standing up of the Jordan frightened them all, so they all ran. And the children of Israel were safe for that period of time. God has been interested with his children in a diet, and some type of diet through their life. It said they did eat of the old corn of the land of the morrow after the Passover. They ate unleavened cakes, parched corn in the self-same day. And the manna ceased on the morrow after they had eaten of the old corn and of the land. Neither had the children of Israel manna any more, but they did eat of the fruit of the land of Canaan that year. That was a complete walkthrough, a 26-minute walkthrough of the pre-existing book of Joshua. We're going to look at that in the next excerpt. It is going to be called Joshua in Victory. It's going to be called Joshua in Victory. Joshua has victory because he followed the command of God, and because he followed the command of God, he had victory. This is a new day. Have you said the Lord's Prayer today? Have I said the Lord's Prayer today? No, I haven't. I waited until now. I say it every day in the morning. I waited until now to say it so that I can say it on this tube in front of you today. My daily statement. 12 grown men came in Matthew 6 and 9, asked Jesus, teach us to pray. And he said, when you pray, this is how you pray. Our Father, the Father in heaven, which art in heaven. Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. Forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever. Amen. Now, that little prayer, we need to say that every day. Jesus told the disciples to pray that on a daily basis. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. That's a daily prayer. If you're a human being, you have problems in your life, you have mistakes you make, you need to ask God daily to forgive you of that debt that you owe him, to ask him the forgiveness. A debt of where you slipped, or where you did something, or where you didn't do something. There are 3 or 4 different kinds of sins. There are sins of commission, that's committing a sin deliberately. There are sins of omission, that's omitting to do that you were supposed to do. And those of us who follow God as close as we can usually hit that omission sin more than any other one. Omitting to get done what we were supposed to get done that day. So, here we are back with the 3 sins. Commission, omission, and deliberately doing it. But our time has come and gone. We must go, and we will see you next time. If you want to look at the next excerpt, it's going to be on Joshua. It's going to be Joshua, the true servant of God. Okay, we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.